High Admiral Kael'Vok stood in the command center of his massive warship, staring at the blue planet that filled the viewing screen. The world looked peaceful from space, with white clouds swirling over green and brown continents. His dark eyes studied the intelligence reports floating in holographic displays around him. Species number 847, he said to himself, reading the data. The creatures on this world called themselves humans. They were bipedal, like many intelligent species, but seemed remarkably primitive. Their technology was crude at best. They had only learned to travel faster than light a few decades ago, which was nothing compared to the thousands of years the Zephyrian hegemony had mastered space travel. Commander Thexere walked up beside him, her scaled hands clasped behind her back. She had served under Kael'Vok for many years and had seen the conquest of dozens of worlds. Another simple integration, Admiral, she said, looking at the reports. They still fight wars among themselves. They haven't even managed to unite their own planet under one government. Kael'Vok nodded slowly. The pattern was always the same. His scouts would study a world for months, gathering intelligence about the species they would soon add to the hegemony. Most species followed predictable paths of development. They would eventually reach space, discover they were not alone in the universe, and when faced with the overwhelming power of the hegemony, they would surrender quickly to avoid destruction. Look at their weapons, Thexere continued, pointing at the display. Kinetic projectiles. Chemical explosives. Their most advanced ships would barely qualify as escort vessels by our standards. She laughed, a sound like grinding metal. I've seen species with stone tools put up more resistance. The human world had been divided into hundreds of different nations for most of their history. Only recently had they formed something called the United Nations, but it was a weak alliance at best. Their military forces were scattered and uncoordinated. Their largest warships carried crews of only a few hundred beings, while the smallest Zephyrian cruiser held thousands. On the surface of the blue world, in a city called Seoul, Captain Kim Dae sat at his desk in the Defense Command Center. The building was deep underground, protected by layers of concrete and steel. Around him, dozens of officers monitored screens showing the positions of human ships throughout the solar system and beyond. Kim Dae was a veteran of several conflicts between human nations. He had fought in wars over water rights, territorial disputes, and resource conflicts. His dark hair was starting to show gray at the temples, and his face bore the lines of someone who had seen too much combat. But he had never faced anything like this. The transmission had arrived that morning, broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously. The alien voice was translated by their computers into perfect Korean, English, Mandarin, and every other major human language. The being on the screen was tall and reptilian, with golden scales and cold yellow eyes. It spoke with the tone of someone making a simple business transaction. People of Earth, the alien had said, I am High Admiral Kael'Vok of the Zephyrian hegemony. Your world has been selected for integration into our empire. You have 72 hours to surrender your military forces and submit to hegemony authority. Resistance will result in the complete destruction of your civilization. This is not a negotiation. This is an inevitability. Lieutenant Park Minute, Kim Dae's aide, stood nearby with a tablet in his hands. Park Minute was young, barely out of the military academy, but he had proven himself to be quick-thinking and reliable. Sir, he said quietly, the message has been confirmed by observation posts on Mars, Lunar Base, and the outer colonies. Long-range sensors show a fleet of unknown vessels at the edge of our solar system. Communications Officer Lee Hanna looked up from her station, her face pale. She was responsible for maintaining contact with human forces throughout the solar system. Captain, I'm receiving reports from all sectors. The alien fleet consists of at least 50 vessels, each one larger than our biggest dreadnought. They're just sitting there at the heliopause, waiting. Strategic Advisor Choi Jin, an older man with gray hair and sharp eyes, walked over to Kim Dae's desk. Choi Jin had spent his career studying military tactics and alien contact protocols. He had written several papers on what humanity should do if they ever encountered hostile extraterrestrial life. Now those theories were being put to the test. Captain, Choi Jin said, I've been analyzing their formation and approach vector. This is clearly a standard intimidation tactic. They're hoping we'll surrender without a fight, just like every other species they've encountered. Kim Dae stared at the alien message still playing on repeat on one of the screens. The creature's yellow eyes seemed to stare directly at him, full of confidence and contempt. For several long minutes, no one in the command center spoke. The only sounds were the quiet hum of electronics and the distant rumble of air circulation systems. Finally, Kim Dae began to smile. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the kind of smile a human might wear when accepting a challenge that everyone else thought was impossible. "They want to see what humans are capable of," he said softly. He turned to Lee Hanna. "Patch me through to UN Command. Priority channel. And get me President Yang on the line." Within the hour, President Yang's response was broadcast across every human communication frequency, from Earth to the farthest colonies. The message was simple, direct, and had been used by humans facing impossible odds for centuries. "Come and take it." Commander Vexthal stood on the bridge of his cruiser as it approached the Titan mining colony. Through the viewport, he could see the small collection of industrial buildings and mining equipment scattered across the moon's surface. It looked exactly like what his intelligence reports had described, a simple civilian outpost with no military value. "Target acquired," his weapons officer reported. 3 facilities, approximately 2,000 humans. Minimal defensive systems detected. Vexthal nodded with satisfaction. This would be quick and easy. The hegemony always began their invasions by attacking outlying colonies first. It served 2 purposes: it demonstrated their power to the main population, and it usually convinced primitive species to surrender before more violence was necessary. In his 15 years of service, he had never seen a species continue fighting after witnessing the destruction of their outer settlements. "Begin the attack," he ordered. Standard procedure. Disable their communications first, then demand surrender. If they refuse, destroy the facility. 2 other Zephyrian cruisers flanked his ship as they descended toward Titan's surface. Each vessel was armed with plasma cannons capable of melting through the strongest human armor. Their shields could deflect any weapon the humans possessed. This should be over within an hour. On Titan's surface, Colony Director Baesu watched the alien ships approach through the command center's main screen. He was a short, stocky man in his 50s who had spent most of his life working in space. He had helped build 3 different colonies and had survived equipment failures, solar storms, and countless other dangers that came with living so far from Earth. Beside him, Chief Engineer Nam Jun typed frantically at his console. Nam Jun was younger, barely 30, but he knew every system in the colony better than anyone. His hands moved quickly across the controls as he tried to find some way to fight back against ships that were clearly far more advanced than anything humans had ever built. "Director," Nam Jun said, his voice tight with stress, "I'm reading 3 ships, each one the size of our biggest cruiser. Their energy signatures are off the charts. We can't fight them with conventional weapons." Security Chief Song Yun stood at another console, coordinating the evacuation of civilians. Song Yun had served in the Korean military before taking this job, and she had trained the colony's security team for emergencies. But nothing in her training had prepared her for an alien invasion. "Sir," Song Yun called out, "I've got transport ships launching from the main hangar. But we have 1,500 people in the deep mining shafts. It'll take at least 20 minutes to get them all to the surface." Baesu felt his stomach drop. 20 minutes was far too long. The alien ships would be in weapons range in less than 5. He looked around the command center at his people, engineers, miners, security officers, all of them looking to him for answers he didn't have. The first alien transmission came through their communication system, translated into perfect Korean by their computers. "Human settlement, this is Commander Vexthal of the Zephyrian hegemony. You will surrender immediately and prepare for occupation. Any resistance will result in your destruction." Nam Jun looked up from his console with desperate eyes. "Director, I have an idea. If I overload the fusion reactors that power the mining equipment, I can turn them into bombs. Big bombs. It might damage their ships when they land." Baesu stared at him for a moment. If they overloaded the reactors, the explosion would destroy the entire colony. But it might also give the transport ships enough time to escape with the civilians. "Do it," he said without hesitation. Song Yun looked at him with shock. "Sir, if we do that, anyone still in the colony will die." "Song Yun," Baesu said firmly, "are the civilians clear of the danger zone?" She checked her screens again, her face pale. "Negative, sir. The transport ships need 15 more minutes to reach minimum safe distance." Baesu felt a cold calm settle over him. "Then we buy them 15 minutes. The next few minutes turned into chaos. The miners who had stayed behind to help with the evacuation grabbed whatever they could use as weapons. Mining lasers designed for cutting through rock were hastily reconfigured to fire at the alien ships. Cargo haulers, massive vehicles used for moving ore, were loaded with explosives and driven toward the landing zones. Construction mechs, giant robotic suits normally used for building and repair work, were turned into makeshift armor for the defenders. The mechs weren't designed for combat, but they were strong and could carry heavy weapons. When the Zephyrian ships finally landed, they expected to find a defenseless civilian population. Instead, they found humans who had turned every piece of equipment into a weapon. The aliens had superior technology, but the humans fought with a desperate creativity that caught them completely off guard. The battle was brief but vicious. The humans couldn't match the aliens' firepower, but they made every shot count. When their weapons were destroyed, they used the construction mechs to physically attack the alien soldiers. When the mechs were disabled, they fought with mining tools and improvised explosives. Commander Vexthal watched from his ship as his ground forces struggled against the unexpected resistance. These weren't trained soldiers, they were miners and engineers and maintenance workers. But they fought as if their lives meant nothing compared to giving their people time to escape. When his forces finally secured the colony, they found it empty except for the bodies of the defenders. And as they began to explore the facilities, Namjun's sabotaged reactors exploded in a chain reaction that nearly destroyed Vexthal's cruiser and killed dozens of his soldiers. Hours later, Vexthal's damaged ship limped back to the main fleet. His hull was cracked, his shields were failing, and he had lost nearly half his ground forces to a civilian mining colony. Admiral Kalevox, he reported over the communication system, the attack was successful, but they don't fight like any species we've encountered before. The news from Titan reached every human settlement within hours. Videos of the mining colony's desperate last stand played on screens across Mars, Luna, the asteroid belt, and the outer colonies. People watched in silence as they saw ordinary miners and engineers sacrifice themselves to buy time for civilian evacuations. On Mars, Industrial Supervisor K.O. Minute stood in the main factory of New Sol Manufacturing. The facility normally produced civilian vehicles, cars, trucks, and construction equipment for the growing Martian colonies. But as K.O. Minute watched the footage from Titan for the third time, he made a decision that would change everything. Shut down the civilian production lines, he announced to his floor supervisors. All of them. Right now. His assistant, production manager Lee Won, looked at him with confusion. Sir, we have contracts to fulfill. The colony expansion project needs those vehicles by next month. K.O. Minute turned to face his entire management team. These were people he had worked with for years, men and women who had helped build Mars into humanity's second home. The colony expansion doesn't matter if we're all dead or enslaved, he said firmly. We're converting everything to military production. I want those assembly lines building combat drones by tomorrow. Within 6 hours, the factory floor was buzzing with activity. Engineers who had spent their careers designing civilian vehicles now worked frantically to create weapons of war. The same assembly lines that had built family cars now produced military drones armed with missiles and laser weapons. In the asteroid belt, mining coordinator Yo-J floated in the zero-gravity command center of Asteroid Station Alpha. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see dozens of massive ore haulers, ships designed to carry millions of tons of raw materials back to Earth and Mars. How many haulers do we have operational? He asked his logistics officer, Supervisor Park Du. Park Du checked his tablet. 43 heavy haulers, 16 medium transport vessels, and about 100 smaller mining craft. Why? Yo-J smiled grimly. Because we're about to turn them into the biggest improvised fleet in human history. He activated the station-wide communication system. All mining crews, this is Coordinator Yo. We're retrofitting every ship for combat. I want missile launchers on the haulers, energy weapons on the transports, and armor plating on everything that can fly. The asteroid miners had always been tough, independent people. Living and working in the cold vacuum of space required courage and ingenuity. When they heard about the alien invasion, they responded the same way they handled every other crisis, by working together and using whatever tools they had available. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in a laboratory buried under the Korean Institute of Science and Technology, Dr. Shin Hai had not slept in 36 hours. She was one of Earth's leading physicists, specializing in advanced propulsion and energy systems. Her laboratory was filled with experimental equipment and prototype technologies that were years away from practical use. Her research assistant, Dr. Park Tai, brought her another cup of coffee as she worked at a holographic display showing the positions of satellites around Earth. Dr. Park Tai said carefully, "Are you sure this will work?" Dr. Shin Hai looked up from her calculations. Her eyes were red with exhaustion, but her mind was sharp and focused. "We're not just turning communication satellites into weapons," she explained. "We're creating a defensive network that uses everything in Earth's orbital space. Every satellite, every piece of space debris, every abandoned hull becomes part of a kinetic bombardment system. The concept was simple but devastating. By using precise calculations and small thruster adjustments, they could turn any object in orbit into a guided projectile. A piece of space junk weighing only a few kilograms could hit with the force of a nuclear weapon when accelerated to the right velocity. But what about our own satellites? Park Tai asked. We'll be destroying our communication and navigation systems. If we lose this war, we won't need satellites, Dr. Shinhai replied. And if we win, we can build new ones. At the edge of the solar system, Admiral Kaelvok stood in his command center reviewing reports from his intelligence officers. The Zephyrian fleet had been waiting for 3 days, expecting the humans to surrender after witnessing the destruction of their outer colony. Every previous species had followed this pattern, a show of force, followed by quick capitulation. But the humans were not following the pattern. Sir, Communications Officer Rexon reported, we're detecting massive industrial activity across all human worlds. Energy signatures are spiking on Mars, Luna, the asteroid belt, and dozens of smaller colonies. They appear to be building something on a massive scale. Kaelvok studied the sensor readings with growing concern. Instead of the expected surrender transmission, his long-range sensors showed increasing activity throughout human space. Factories were running at maximum capacity, shipyards were launching new vessels, and energy usage was climbing to unprecedented levels. What are they building? He asked his intelligence officer. Unknown, Admiral. But based on energy consumption patterns, it appears to be military hardware. Lots of it. On Lunar Base, Commander Oseo stood in the Tactical Operations Center, coordinating humanity's response to the invasion. The Lunar Base had been built as a military outpost, but it had never been intended to coordinate a war against an alien empire. Now it had become the nerve center for humanity's desperate defense. Her tactical officer, Major Kim Woo, was updating fleet deployment charts on the main display. Each symbol represented human ships throughout the solar system, military vessels, civilian craft converted for combat, and improvised weapons platforms. Commander, Kim Woo said, I've been analyzing the alien fleet composition. They have superior technology, but they're operating under the assumption that we'll fight like a conventional military force. Oseo nodded. She had spent years studying military history, including humanity's most desperate battles. They expect us to protect our cities, defend our resources, and minimize civilian casualties. They don't understand that every human settlement is now a military production facility, and every civilian is now a potential combatant. She activated the secure communication channel that connected Lunar Base to every human military command. All stations, this is Commander Oseo. Operation Human Wave is now authorized. Show them what happens when you threaten a species that learned warfare on a death world. The transformation of human space happened faster than anyone thought possible. Within 3 weeks of the Titan attack, every human settlement had become a weapon factory. Ships that had carried families on vacation trips were now bristling with missile launches. Cargo vessels that had transported food and supplies were loaded with explosives and turned into guided bombs. Captain Lee Bo stood on the bridge of what had once been the passenger liner New Horizon. The ship had carried tourists between Earth and Mars for 15 years, providing luxury accommodations and entertainment for wealthy travelers. Now the dining halls were filled with ammunition, the passenger cabins housed weapons systems, and the observation deck had been converted into a missile launch platform. Status report, Lee Bo called to his crew. Most of them had been civilian workers just a month ago, hotel staff, entertainers, and maintenance technicians who had volunteered to stay and fight when the ship was converted for military use. All weapons systems are operational, Captain, reported his tactical officer, former cruise director Kim Ha. We have 16 missile tubes, 8 laser cannons, and enough explosives to take out a small moon. Lee Bo nodded grimly. The New Horizon was not designed for combat, and everyone aboard knew they were flying in a ship that could barely withstand its own weapons fire. But it was what they had, and they would use it. In the asteroid belt, Commander Park Da led a squadron of converted mining vessels. Her flagship had once been called Deep Digger, designed to extract valuable metals from asteroids. Now it was armed with torpedo tubes and armor plating welded onto its hull by the mining crews themselves. Formation check, Park Da ordered over the communication system. Around her, 23 other mining ships moved in a rough attack formation. None of them had been built for space combat, but their crews knew how to work in the dangerous environment of the asteroid belt. They understood that in space, everything could kill you if you made a mistake. Commander, her sensor operator called out, I'm reading 17 enemy vessels approaching from the outer system. They're moving fast and their energy signatures are massive. Park Da smiled coldly. The Zephyrians expected to face human military vessels with trained crews and proper weapons. Instead, they would face miners and industrial workers who had spent their lives turning raw materials into useful tools. And right now, the most useful tool was a weapon that could destroy alien invaders. The most ambitious conversion project was taking place near Jupiter, where engineer Choi So was overseeing the transformation of Industrial Station 7 into a mobile weapons platform. The station had been designed to process raw materials from the gas giant's moons, but Choi So had different plans for it. We're detaching the station from its orbital anchor, she explained to her engineering team. The fusion reactors can provide enough power to move the entire structure, and we're installing the biggest weapons array in human space. Her assistant, Engineer Nam Woo, looked nervous. The station wasn't designed to be mobile. The structural stress could tear it apart. Then we better make sure we hit our targets on the first pass, Choi So replied. Because we probably won't get a second chance. Aboard the Zephyrian flagship, Admiral Kaelvox stared at his tactical displays with growing disbelief. His intelligence officers had been updating him on human fleet movements for weeks, and the numbers made no sense. How many ships do they have? He demanded from his aide, Commander Jexmar. Jexmar consulted his datapad, his scales showing signs of stress. Unknown, sir. Our estimates keep changing. Every human vessel appears to be armed now. Cargo ships, passenger liners, even maintenance pods. They've turned their entire civilian fleet into weapons. Kaelvox had conquered dozens of worlds in his career. He had seen species with advanced technology surrender after a single demonstration of Zephyrian power. He had watched entire civilizations capitulate rather than face the might of the hegemony. But the humans were doing something unprecedented. They were turning their entire society into a military force. Sir, his sensor operator reported, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the inner system. It appears they're moving space stations out of orbit and arming them with heavy weapons. On Earth, the coordination of humanity's defense fell to General Han Wu, operating from Seoul Command Center. He had served in 3 different wars between human nations, but nothing had prepared him for organizing a planetary defense against an alien empire. Status report from all theaters, he called to his staff. Mars Defense Command reports 60 converted vessels ready for combat, reported his aide. Asteroid Belt Mining Consortium has 47 armed ships. Lunar Base has 12 military vessels plus 30 civilian craft with improvised weapons. General Han Wu's daughter, Captain Han Yo, led fighter squadrons from Busan Air Base. She had been one of Earth's best pilots before the invasion, flying in aerobatic shows and test flights for new aircraft designs. Now she commanded a squadron of fighters that had been hastily upgraded with weapons intended for much larger ships. Dad, she reported over the secure channel, my pilots are ready. We know our aircraft aren't designed for space combat, but we'll make it work. Across the world, ordinary civilians had joined the war effort. Kim So, who had worked in an automobile factory, now built guidance systems for missiles. Park Hee, who had been a school teacher, trained new recruits in basic military tactics. Millions of humans who had lived peaceful lives were now learning to make weapons and fight wars. The first major test came at Alpha Centauri, where the Zephyrians sent their 5th fleet to crush human resistance once and for all. 200 warships that had never known defeat approached what appeared to be a disorganized collection of human vessels. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships fought with desperate creativity, using tactics that horrified the disciplined Zephyrian commanders. When Captain Jung Min's destroyer was crippled by enemy fire, he ordered his crew to evacuate, then piloted the ship directly into the Zephyrian flagship. The explosion destroyed both vessels and sent shock waves through the enemy formation. For the first time in their history, the mighty 5th Fleet retreated in chaos, leaving behind dozens of their own ships and facing an enemy that seemed to view death as just another weapon to be used against them. 6 months had passed since the first alien ships appeared at the edge of human space. What had begun as an expected easy conquest for the Zephyrian hegemony had turned into their worst military disaster in 1,000 years. Admiral Kaelvox sat alone in his damaged command ship, staring at the empty space where his mighty fleet had once been. Of the 300 warships he had brought to conquer humanity, fewer than 50 remained operational. The rest had been destroyed, captured, or abandoned by crews who had lost the will to fight. His once proud uniform was stained and wrinkled. His golden scales had lost their shine, and his yellow eyes held the hollow look of someone who had seen the impossible happen. Final transmission ready, Admiral, his communications officer reported. The bridge crew that remained was small and defeated. Many of his best officers had died in the fighting, and others had simply deserted when they realized the war was lost. Kalevox activated the long-range transmitter that would carry his message back to the Galactic Council on the other side of the galaxy. This would be his final report as commander of the 5th Conquest Fleet, and he wanted to make sure every species in the galaxy understood what had happened here. Galactic Council, he began, his voice tired and broken, this is Admiral Kalevox of the Zephyrian Hegemony. I am transmitting my final report on the attempted integration of species designation 847, the humans of Sol system. He paused, trying to find words to explain what no military commander in galactic history had ever had to report before. We have awakened something that should have been left alone. The humans don't just fight wars, they become war itself. Every defeat we inflicted only made them stronger. Every loss they suffered only increased their resolve. The Admiral's hands shook slightly as he continued. I have conquered 4 to 7 worlds in my career. I have seen species surrender after losing a single battle. I have watched entire civilizations capitulate rather than face our superior technology. But humans are different. They don't know how to quit. They don't understand the concept of acceptable losses. When we destroyed their colonies, they built more ships. When we killed their soldiers, more civilians took their place. They turned their entire civilization into a weapon pointed at us. On Earth, in the newly constructed Sol Galactic Center, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. President Yang sat at a circular conference table with representatives from dozens of alien species. These were not conquered peoples, but former subjects of the Zephyrian hegemony who had declared independence after witnessing humanity's victory. Ambassador Ryu has served as translator, her advanced linguistic software allowing her to communicate with species whose languages had never been heard by humans before. The representatives came in all shapes and sizes, some resembled insects, others looked like walking plants, and a few appeared to be made of living crystal. We don't seek to conquer anyone, President Yang explained through Ryuha's translation system. We offer partnership. Freedom. The right to determine your own destiny without fear of invasion or subjugation. A representative from the Corvan Republic, a species that looked like tall, thin birds, spoke through its own translator. The Zephyrians ruled our world for 300 years. We never thought it was possible to resist them. How did you defeat them so completely? Yang smiled sadly. We didn't want to fight them. We just wanted to be left alone. But when they forced war on us, we did what humans have always done when faced with extinction, we fought back with everything we had. In a research facility on Mars, Dr. Shin Hai worked alongside scientists from a dozen different species. She had been promoted to Director of Human Galactic Sciences, and her job now was to coordinate peaceful technology exchange between humanity and its new allies. Her research partner, Dr. Kim Jun, helped translate human scientific concepts into forms that alien minds could understand. The quantum resonance principle you've described is fascinating, said Dr. Zeth Cole, a former Zephyrian physicist whose people had defected to the human side during the war. On my world, we never considered using subspace fluctuations for faster-than-light communication. Dr. Shin Hai nodded as she reviewed the aliens' equations on her holographic display. We developed it out of necessity during the war. When the Zephyrians jammed our normal communication systems, we had to find new ways to coordinate our fleets. The peaceful cooperation between former enemies would have been impossible to imagine just months earlier. But the war had changed everything. Species that had been subjects of the hegemony for centuries now found themselves free to develop their own technology and culture. Admiral Oseo, formerly Commander Oseo of Lunar Base, now commanded the human defense fleet from her flagship orbiting Earth. She had been promoted after her successful coordination of humanity's early defense efforts. Her job was not to conquer new worlds, but to protect those who asked for human help. Status report, she called to her tactical officer, Colonel Park Minute, who had also been promoted after his service during the war. All patrol sectors are secure, Admiral, Park Minute reported. Commander Lee Dal is leading Squadron 7 through the former Zephyrian border region, and Commander Kim Sae has established a defense station in the Rigel system to protect our new Andromedan allies. Oseo nodded with satisfaction. The human defense fleet was not like the conquest fleets of the old hegemony. They only went where they were invited, and they only fought to protect others from aggression. Somewhere in the outer galaxy, Admiral Kalevox completed his final log entry before his ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying the survivors of his fleet back to Zephyrian space. He wanted to leave one last warning for any species foolish enough to consider attacking humanity. To any species considering war with humanity, don't, he wrote. They evolved on a world that tried to kill them every day for millions of years. They see impossible odds not as a deterrent, but as a normal Tuesday morning challenge. They will never surrender, never break, never stop fighting. We thought we were the apex predators of the galaxy. We were wrong. On Earth, in a small cafe in downtown Seoul, 3 men sat around a table sharing drinks and memories. Bae Soo, the former director of the Titan mining colony, had somehow survived the war despite his heroic last stand. Nam Jun, his old chief engineer, had spent the war building weapons and now worked on reconstruction projects. They were joined by several other miners who had fought in the early battles. Nam Jun raised his coffee cup in a toast, a tradition that had become popular among war veterans. To humanity, he said with a grin, the species that turned being outnumbered into a tactical advantage. The other men laughed and raised their own cups. They had survived something that should have been impossible, a war against a galactic empire with superior technology and unlimited resources. But they had won, not through superior weapons or tactics, but through the simple human refusal to give up. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson that would be remembered for generations. Never declare war on a species that considers survival itself a form of warfare.